Hey everybody, Trey here, back with an updated forecast discussion for our significant severe weather outbreak that is expected to take place beginning today, Friday, March 14th, from the Midwest all the way down into the Southeast, shifting into tomorrow where it will possibly peak across the Southeast, and then moving into the eastern seaboard states on Sunday. Since we last spoke in our most recent video, the SPC has upgraded both today, Friday, and tomorrow, Saturday, to a level 4 out of 5 moderate risk, with the expectation that a broad swath of the U.S. and lots of folks are going to be under the gun for all severe hazards, potentially significant severe hazards, including a threat for long track, strong to possibly violent tornadoes, significant damaging winds in excess of 80 to even 100 miles per hour, and large to very large hail. So I can't stress enough how impactful this setup is expected to be. There is going to be a lot of folks under the gun for some significant severe weather starting this afternoon, going all the way through tonight and into tomorrow, and then we shift things into the eastern seaboard states on Sunday. In this video, we're going to focus on the two main days of this 3-day stretch, both today and tomorrow, Friday and Saturday. So let's dive into the SPC outlooks. This is the SPC outlook for today. The SPC again has outlined a moderate risk level 4 out of 5 in the red shaded region you see here. So that is going to include places like Des Moines, Springfield, Illinois, Hannibal, Missouri, Jefferson City, Cape Girardeau, Jackson, all the way down toward the Memphis area, Paducah, Kentucky, and St. Louis. St. Louis is smack dab in the middle. The entire St. Louis metro is under the gun for some robust severe weather today. But everybody in that red shaded region in particular, along with a large enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 in the orange shaded region there. So that includes Lincoln, Omaha, Kansas City, all the way down toward Greenville and Jackson, Mississippi. Nashville, you are in the enhanced risk. Right going up to Indianapolis and Chicago. Chicago is in that enhanced level 3 out of 5 area for today. So again, a very widespread swath of the country in the greatest severe weather threat categories for today, with large, slight, and marginal risk extending. The marginal risk extends all the way up to northern Wisconsin into north central Minnesota and all the way down to the Gulf Coast there. So lots of folks under the gun today for significant severe weather. The hazards for today. There is a very elevated tornado risk, particularly in the red stippled region you see here. So that is going to be our 15% hatched area for tornadoes. That means within that red shaded region, there is a 15% chance that a tornado will occur that is EF2 or greater in intensity within 25 miles of any point within this red stippled region. Now you might think 15%, that's still a very low chance, 85% chance that won't happen. That is very true, but if you think that 1 to 2% of all thunderstorms across the world produce tornadoes, the fact that we have that 15% chance in this confined of an area is quite an elevated risk, and the risk is there for strong long-track tornadoes, particularly going into late this afternoon through the evening and nighttime hours tonight. Large 10% hatched risk also extends up into southeast Iowa, north central Illinois, all the way down into the Gulf Coast states, southern Mississippi, western Alabama, under the gun this evening and tonight for that severe weather threat that includes the threat for strong tornadoes. Also a threat for significant damaging winds. This was the initial reason for the upgrade to a moderate risk yesterday. 45% hatched area in the pink stippled region here for significant, intense, damaging straight line wind gusts. So this setup is going to be quite effective, it appears, in producing significant straight line wind gusts, perhaps in excess of 80, 90, even 100 miles per hour in spots. So just because you think that a tornado warning is not issued for your area, a severe thunderstorm warning is issued for your area, that does not mean that you can't take it seriously, because that could include the threat for straight line winds approaching or even exceeding 100 miles per hour in spots. So straight line, damaging winds, and significant tornadoes certainly on the ballot for today. And then large to very large hail. Large hail probably not going to be the biggest threat with this setup, but the SPC has outlined a risk for some large to very large hail, possibly 2 inches or more in diameter, particularly in that red stippled region there, from the eastern, northeast Missouri, central Illinois, southeastward, all the way down into western Tennessee and northern Mississippi. Then we move into tomorrow. Tomorrow is, as we talked about, starting to be perhaps the most significant of this 3-day stretch, particularly across the Southeast. This outlook was issued last night, and I just want to point your attention to some of the wording that was used, pretty high-level wording that was used. Several tornadic supercells are expected to develop within this cluster by mid to late afternoon as the low-level jet intensifies. Multiple long-track, high-end tornadoes will be possible. So there is certainly going to be an elevated risk for strong, possibly violent tornadoes that are going to track for long distances tomorrow, mostly across that eastern Louisiana into much of Mississippi and Alabama corridor. That moderate risk level 4 out of 5 you see there. So New Orleans, Mobile, Gulfport, Biloxi, Jackson, Mississippi, all the way up into Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, Huntsville, you're kind of right on the edge there, Athens, Alabama, all the way down into southern Alabama, Selma, Montgomery, Dothan, all the way over toward the Georgia-Alabama line in that greatest threat for severe weather tomorrow, that level 4 out of 5 moderate risk, with a large enhanced risk extending up into southern Kentucky, Bowling Green, Nashville, Jackson, Tennessee, Chattanooga, Atlanta in the enhanced risk, level 3 out of 5, over toward Tallahassee, Alexandria, Louisiana, Greenville, Mississippi. You are in that level 3 out of 5 for tomorrow. So the threats for tomorrow, pretty much the same as today, with the threat for significant long-track tornadoes possible in the red stippled region you see there. With a large 10% hatched region extending all the way up into southern Kentucky, central Georgia, along the Gulf Coast as well. Significant damaging winds expected. 45% hatched area once again for significant damaging winds and large to very large hail, likely in the early portion of the convective life cycle from Tennessee southward to the Gulf Coast region. So lots of hazards on tap for today. Just a quick look at Sunday as well. Slight risk along the eastern seaboard states as the system moves off. It will be losing some steam, it looks like, going into Sunday, but we could see some severe weather persisting into the Sunday time frame out across the eastern seaboard states. So long preamble there to show you how many people are just at risk here. And so let's go ahead and dive in. This is our current look at the upper air map here. So this is going to be our 500 millibar map. And right away, you see what our trough, our weather maker is going to be for this system. Very well-defined, negatively tilted shortwave trough with a very strong jet streak rounding the base of this trough. 110 knot jet streak there rounding the base of this trough. It's already taking on a nice negative tilt nature here. And that is going to eject pretty quickly off to the northeast, placing the region from eastern Nebraska into Iowa, Missouri, Illinois in that left and right exit region, for which are our favored quadrants for severe weather. Particularly the left exit region, that is going to be positioned well over that Midwest region down into the Mid-South going into the afternoon hours today. Very strong trough, lots of forcing associated with this trough. If we go up to 250 millibars or 300 millibars, excuse me, quite a bit of defluence in the exit region of this trough. You see that negative tilt nature to the trough right there. And you see the winds over the Central Plains more out of the due south, with winds over Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, out of the almost west-southwest. So those winds are very much spreading apart in the upper levels of the atmosphere, creating that void. And Mother Nature doesn't like that void. So what it does is it brings air up from below, and that's how we get rising motion and ascent, upward motion, to initiate storms in given severe weather environments. And we certainly have a lot of that here with this setup today. Again, that's going to translate off to the east, placing that broad area of defluence over that kind of eastern Kansas, eastern Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa vicinity, particularly for this afternoon. We'll talk about the evening round and overnight round here in just a second. As we've had this strong shortwave make its way out across the higher terrain of the central and southern Rockies, we have seen a very robust surface response already. We've been talking about this for a couple days now, that this low-level response with this system is expected to be quite intense, and certainly that has been the case so far. Surface low development has taken place across eastern Colorado, and you see that pressure gradient, very tightly packed pressure isobars here, indicating very strong non-thunderstorm winds with this system. And that's why also one of the big sides of this system is going to be the fire weather threat. Extreme fire weather conditions extending from eastern New Mexico all the way into western and northwest Texas to much of Oklahoma and southeast Kansas, including Wichita, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Norman, Lawton, Wichita Falls, Abilene, Lubbock, Midland, Odessa. They're very broad swath of the southern plains under the gun for a potential wildfire outbreak. Some of the language that the SPC is using, with wind gusts outside of thunderstorms expected to be in excess of 50, 60, 70 miles an hour today. And as this surface low is only expected to deepen with time as it ejects off to the northeast. And so we're going to see very strong winds, particularly on the backside of this surface low. Lots of dry air as well out here with the backside of this surface low, and lots of fuels in place. We've had a little bit of rainfall recently across parts of the southern plains, but the winds and the dry air should be able to compensate for that, for fast spreading wildfire conditions today. So we could see multiple significant fires that spread very quickly and produce some pretty erratic fire behavior. So definitely watch out for that, and that fire threat will continue going into tomorrow. Critical conditions down across Texas, elevated conditions across the central and southern plains, and we just have more on the way for the next several days as well. So pretty nasty fire conditions with this setup, because of those strong winds at the surface. But back to the severe side of things, once again, very strong surface low is developing, and that is going to eject off to the northeast today, positioning itself somewhere in eastern Nebraska into eastern Kansas by this afternoon. And that is because we'll have such strong southerly flow out across this area. That's going to try its hardest to get that moisture all the way up into these regions of the east central plains and Midwest. Now, again, this has been kind of the bugaboo or flying the ointment with this setup, is the degree of moisture return, particularly for areas off to the north here across the Midwest. With such a strong surface low, you're bound to get at least some moisture up into these regions. And speaking of that, let's take a look at our current surface observations. So you see where our 60s dew point line is going to be right now. It looks to be, we've got some patchy 60s dew points there across Arkansas, some 60s readings up into far southwestern Tennessee, much of Mississippi. So that most robust moisture is still off to the south, it looks like, and that is going to try to make its way off to the north going into the day today. Already mid-50s dew points, low to mid-50s dew points with northward extent up into Missouri, Illinois, into Iowa. And so those are going to continue to push their way northward. Those 60s dew points probably not going to make their way all the way northward. We probably will have a little bit of vertical mixing today to really offset a little bit of the more robust moisture return up into these regions. But by the evening hours, that low-level jet is really going to ramp up significantly, and that's going to try to bring those 60s dew points up here into southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, and areas off to the south. That's why the SPC has seen a little bit of an increased tornado risk, particularly in the evening and nighttime hours tonight, as we get that robust moisture to make its way northward, perhaps a little bit farther northward than what the models thought initially, into this corridor here. You recall a couple days ago, it was kind of down in here, that 60s dew point line. Well, that is not the case. We're expecting it to get a little bit farther northward here today for that potentially significant severe threat. Even with more limited moisture off to the north, we're going to have plenty of ingredients for severe weather. Enough moisture to support intense severe storms with that significant damaging wind and tornado risk as far north as even places like Iowa, Illinois, southern Wisconsin, southern Minnesota. So that is going to be the case today. The surface, as you'd expect with such a strong surface low here, we've had that low-level cyclone translate into the low levels as well. 850 millibar flow, very strong low-level jet across a broad region here. 30, 40 plus knots of flow all the way up from the Canadian border, Great Lakes region, all the way down into the Gulf Coast states there, Texas, Louisiana, with the core of the low-level jet, 50 to 60 knots or so out here across Oklahoma and Texas right now. And that's going to, again, translate off to the northeast today, and that will start to increase as we go into the evening hours tonight, really ramping up that low-level jet and that low-level warm advection and moisture return into these areas of southern Illinois, southeast Missouri, and areas southward, giving us that significant risk, significant low-level shear for that strong tornado risk overnight, and the persistence of that significant damaging wind risk across these areas. Very strong flow in the low levels of the atmosphere, going to be easily transferred down to the surface through downdrafts within these intense severe storms. So when you have 60, 70 knot low-level jet here across a broad swath of the region, when you have strong downdrafts in these storms, which we will, and we'll talk about that here in just a second, that is going to lead to a very robust wind threat, a straight line wind threat, as that stronger flow is transferred down to the surface and even accelerates a little bit as it tries to reach the surface there. All right, how about some soundings here? Let's go ahead and take a look at some soundings. So we'll take a look here. We'll start on the Gulf Coast. This is kind of our source region for the moisture. One interesting note here, the moisture at this point is quite shallow. 66 over 65 at the surface here at Lake Charles, so southwest Louisiana. But it doesn't extend all that high into the atmosphere. Very shallow, low-level moist layer beneath quite a bit of drier air aloft. You see that separation between the temperature profile and the green dew point profile there, pretty large, about up through the entire atmosphere here, really. So that's a little bit of an interesting note with this setup. I do believe we'll get some moistening here as that low-level jet really starts to ramp up and shift to more southerly. We're going to start to pull more. Instead, you see here a little bit more westerly flow, pulling that air from kind of the drier air mass out west of Lake Charles. Those are going to shift to more out of the south here across this region. So our trajectories are going to be more over the Gulf, over where that more robust moisture is already across east and southeast Texas. And that will pull that moisture northward and moisten the column a little bit here in the low levels to give us a little bit more juice, if you will, to support robust severe storms going into the afternoon and evening hours tonight. Shreveport, much of the same, very shallow moisture. Jackson, Mississippi, much of the same. So pretty homogeneous atmosphere at this point across the Gulf Coast region, which is basically our moisture source region. Off to the north, we are dealing with quite a bit of not all that favorable thermodynamic profiles here for severe weather yet, but we are going to start to see that increase as we go through the day, get some surface heating, get that surface low to really eject off to the north and really pull that moisture northward, and our features will certainly become a little bit better defined as we go through the day today. Let's real quick on our surface map. Again, our surface low here, we're going to see a dry line start to develop out across the southern plains that will really quickly shift off to the north and east into the Midwest and mid-south going into the day today. That moisture gradient is going to be pretty large. We'll go back to the west here real quick. And you see that moisture gradient, teens, 20s, and 30s dew points off to the west here, 50s and 60s off here to the east. So our dry line already starting to take shape pretty well out across these areas of central to south Texas there. And again, that will develop northward as that low takes off. We not really much in the way of a moisture gradient up here yet across the central plains, but that will change as we get that robust moisture return off to the north. We'll have a very robust dry line well ahead of the synoptic cold front, and that dry line will be our main initiating mechanism, it looks like, for severe weather in this particular setup today. All right, let's take a look at some model data here. This is the 12Z NAM coming in as we are recording this video, just about 9 to 9:30 a.m. Central Daylight Time. We'll start at 500 millibars, as we always do. There's our little shortwave trough out here across the southern Rockies region there. Strong jet streak rounding the base of that shortwave. And that will continue to take on a negative tilt with time and really start to eject into that central plains area in mid-south by afternoon today. This is at 21Z, so 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Just a textbook look of a shortwave for a significant severe weather event. You see our jet streak right in here, 100 plus knots, even 100, some blue in there. That's 130 plus knot flow in the core of that jet streak as progged by the NAM here. So just a very impressive little shortwave. It is somewhat compact, but very impressive, very intense. And that is going to lead to quite a bit of area here under the gun for severe weather. You see, as we go into the afternoon and evening today, that shortwave is going to be positioned to where we have in our exit region going to be up here across Iowa, Missouri into Illinois. That left exit region, our most favored quadrant for rising motion here. So we're going to have a lot of forcing concentrated in that left exit region, leading to more of a quick transition to a linear mode up here with northward extent, it looks like. With so much forcing and a little bit of an issue with the low-level moisture compared to areas farther south. Again, plenty of moisture to support severe weather, but those temperature dew point spreads may be a little bit on the high side, leading to stronger downdrafts. It's going to lead to more storm coalescence and a lot of forcing, going to lead to a lot of updrafts along the boundaries there, and that is going to initiate a pretty rapid transition to a strongly forced squall line that will pose that significant damaging wind and embedded tornado risk there as it moves across those Midwest states going into the afternoon. Storm initiation here, you see the trough starts to move into the region here with forcing moving in probably by early afternoon at the latest, 18 to 20 Z probably. So, just after lunchtime, 1 to 3 p.m., storm should initiate up here. And then we'll see more initiation down here to the south. And the farther south we go, you get a little bit more glancing of a blow with this trough. And so perhaps slightly less forcing with southern extent. And that could yield a slightly more discrete mode down here across that portion of southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, northeast Arkansas, western Tennessee, particularly as we go into the evening. The trough continues to eject off to the northeast, and now this region is sort of left in the right entrance region of this jet streak. So if we're going to kind of separate into our quadrants there, you see the right entrance region is going to be positioned really well over that corridor of southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, western Kentucky, and Tennessee, down into northern Mississippi, eastern Arkansas. And so the left exit region and the right entrance region are favored quadrants for upward motion. And so that right entrance region is going to be positioned over this area nicely going into the evening hours today. This is basically at 1 a.m. Central Daylight Time, early Saturday morning. So as we go into the evening after sunset, things might start to pick up a little bit in robustness down here. This was a little bit of a conditional threat the past few days, and that we've gained a little bit more confidence in the fact that we're going to perhaps see robust storms in this right entrance region as we go into the evening and overnight hours tonight. So this could be a very potent risk as well. A little bit more glancing blow from the trough, and in that right entrance region, we could see the threat for discrete supercells develop as we go after sunset, 8, 9, 10 p.m. toward the early morning hours of Saturday. Could be some discrete supercells that develop here in that right entrance region. So that is going to need to be watched very, very closely. So we'll move on to Saturday here in just a second, but let's go down and take a look at our surface obs here. So this is the surface. You see that surface low developing across the eastern Colorado, western Kansas vicinity today. It moves off to the northeast with time. By 21Z, that surface low is right there, Kansas, kind of the Kansas-Nebraska border region. Very, very deep low into the mid 970 millibar range. So a very rapidly deepening surface low, going to continue to deepen as we go through the day today and try to really pump that moisture northward. You see quite a bit of an area with those warm temperatures, 75, 78 degrees up here. So temperatures are expected to get pretty warm. With a little bit less moisture off to the north, that is going to lead to higher temperature dew point spreads and a greater chance for more outflow production with those storms off to the north ahead of this surface low. We'll take a look at our moisture here in a second, but before we do that, let's just continue to look at this surface low. So surface low here, Kansas-Nebraska border. Looks like it's a very interesting kind of progression here. That dry line looks to be probably somewhere in here, arcing dry line back out to the east and southeast with that warm air out ahead of it and plenty of moisture out ahead of it, especially with southern extent to support robust severe weather. Just up here where it gets a little bit warmer up into the Midwest with a little bit less moisture removed from the moisture source, looks like we're going to see a little bit of a better chance for outflow production there as we go into the afternoon hours today. As we go into the evening, that low ejects off to the northeast, and we're just going to be left with this kind of broad southerly flow here, broad surface troughing out across the southeast. Should be enough, even though we're well removed from the surface low, with that right entrance region dynamics there across this area, and still some surface troughing down in this region as well. Should have enough forcing to initiate some supercells here going into the evening hours today. So again, that's why confidence has increased in this overnight threat in the portions of the Mid-South into the Southeast, where it was a little bit more conditional a few days ago. All right, moisture. Let's see where our moisture is. So the NAM has initialized moisture pretty well here. 60s dew points all the way up into north central Mississippi and Alabama, southeast Arkansas over into kind of north Texas there. Let's kind of compare where we are now. We'll go to 15Z. So the NAM has 60s dew points all the way up to the Missouri boot heel, basically, by this point. So 15Z is 10 a.m. just after 10 a.m. is about 20 minutes from as we're speaking right now. And so let's take a look at the surface data here. Let me go back to our mid-south sector. So those 60s dew points, NAM initializing it pretty well. We do have a couple of 60s dew point readings up there into the northeast Arkansas vicinity, stretching down to the south, over there into north Texas, 60s dew points there. So the NAM has initialized the moisture pretty well. I was a little concerned a couple days ago that the moisture with that kind of initial wave on Wednesday, the NAM was a few degrees too high with the moisture, but it looks to be initializing things pretty well today with 60s dew points south of that line, and that is what it is shown here with this setup today. Maybe just a tad too far north with the most robust moisture, but overall, the idea is pretty good. So as we go into the afternoon, that surface low going to really draw that moisture northward into the Midwest and Mid-South, and we should see widespread low to mid 50s dew points out across southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, eastern Nebraska, Iowa, northern Missouri. Not sure what that little pocket of lower dew points is there across Missouri. Could be some convective feedback. But overall, this is going to promote as we saw, temperatures getting up into the mid to upper 70s with dew points in the low to mid 50s. So you have 77 over 53. That's pretty high temperature dew point spread wise. So that is going to allow for that very strong downdraft, steep lapse rates in the low to mid levels. That is going to allow for those really strong winds aloft with that low level jet to be transferred down to the surface via downdrafts. And that's why the wind threat, the straight line wind threat with this setup is going to be really at the forefront along with that tornado risk, because of the ability for these storms and what looks to be a strongly forced line with as much forcing as there is, and the kind of outflow dominant nature of the early storms. Going to be a very strongly forced squall line with the very efficient downdraft production, transferring those winds down to the surface where they may accelerate and get to that 70, 80, 90, even 100 mile an hour range across that area. So that is going to be the main threat for the areas off to the north. As far as areas to the south, to take a look at this. So this is going to be at 3Z here. And I'm going to go back a few runs for us. So this was a couple days ago. Back at 3Z, that moisture in just a very narrow tongue up into far southern Illinois, the Missouri Boot Heel region. This was a model run from 2 days ago, the morning 2 days ago on the 12th. And you see we've had a little bit of an improvement in moisture here, a little bit farther back to the west, but moisture now up into kind of northeast Missouri, central Illinois, that ribbon of 60s dew points. So as the storms fire here along the dry line and move off into this better tongue of moisture here going into the afternoon and early evening, this is where the significant tornado threat should maximize. There is a chance as we get a little bit farther south, as we said, slightly less forcing with southern extent, a little bit better orientation of the shear vectors with respect to the initiating boundary. That is going to allow for more semi-discrete supercells here, moving into this tongue of better moisture out across the Mid-South, and that is going to give us that threat for significant tornadoes. And I'll zoom in here a little bit for us to our Midwest sector. So again, arc up there to the north, but that ribbon of moisture is going to be favorable for a little bit higher chances for significant tornadoes. Let's take a couple soundings out here, out across our Midwest sector. We'll go to 21Z up here, out across maybe Iowa, out ahead of that moisture axis. So there's your dry line feeding back into the low. Your strongly forced squall line with more outflow dominant storms up in that region. And you see there, very well mixed boundary layer, kind of that inverted V type profile, which is going to be favorable for strong outflow production, strong downdrafts. Plenty of instability, however, 2,100 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE with some turning of those low level winds. So as we go into the early evening, as those temperatures come down a little bit, we should see the tornado risk kind of ramp up with that line, strongly forced QLCS. Some embedded circulation certainly possible, but again, translating those strong winds down to the surface is going to be pretty easy for these storms, and so that line will produce significant damaging winds. But as we go into the early evening hours, let's take a couple soundings here. Southeast Missouri, low-level jet should be ramping up around this time as well. And so you see here is our kind of dry line boundary. That's going to be our initiating boundary, and those shear vectors decently perpendicular to the initiating boundary. Not going to be perfect, so there's probably going to be more of a mixed mode down here, maybe some linear segments and some semi-discrete supercells, but the semi-discrete supercell threat is certainly greater down here across eastern and southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, into areas to the south as we go into the evening hours tonight. So here we are at 0Z, and you see what is going to be happening here. A little bit of a wonkiness there in the low-level profile. Wouldn't put too much stock into that. That could be just some model feedback there. But overall, 1,700 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, strong varying and strengthening of the winds with height, leading to this hodograph. Just a really intense hodograph. Over 600 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. That's probably a little bit high from what we're going to see in reality, but still, even if we see half of that, that's about 320 meters squared per second squared effective SRH with robust instability as expected. That's going to be an environment favorable for significant tornadoes. And if we get that more semi-discrete mode, which is looking pretty likely, then we could see that threat for strong long-track tornadoes materialize going into the late afternoon, but especially early to mid-evening hours there across this kind of middle Missouri Valley or middle Mississippi Valley region there. Southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, western Kentucky, western Tennessee, northeast Arkansas vicinity. Farther south, things are going to get interesting going into the evening hours. then. So again, you see that right entrance region of the jet streak there across the this area down to the south as well. As we go into the evening, we're going to have plenty of moisture in place out across these regions. Dew points in the mid to upper 60s up here into northeast Arkansas, western Tennessee, much of Mississippi. So we're going to have a broad warm sector here to support development. Again, forcing down here much weaker. And with just warm advection in the background, that continued transport of moisture off to the north, that is going to allow for that warm advection forcing as well as that subtle forcing from the trough to probably allow for a few discrete supercells down in here. So let's take a sounding here. This is going to be at 1 a.m. Central Daylight Time. They're in far eastern Arkansas, just kind of right on the Mississippi River there. And so this is what we're dealing with. Robust instability, 2,500 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Strong low-level instability as well, 180 joules per kilogram, 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE there. So very fat, low and mid deep layer instability with this kind of a hodograph. Nice veering and strengthening of the winds with height there. Strong deep layer shear to support supercells. Certainly a significant tornado environment here going into the evening hours. So going to have to watch closely for any discrete development out here. This is going to put folks like Jonesboro, Memphis, Jackson, Tennessee, Greenville, Mississippi, there, even as far south as maybe Jackson to that I-20 corridor there, northern Louisiana to south central Mississippi, going to be under the gun there. Tupelo, Oxford, moving into the overnight hours. We're going to have plenty of warm sector there to support a really robust environment for tornadic supercells overnight. So folks in these regions certainly need to have weather radios handy, have multiple sources of receiving warnings, because this is going to be, again, an after-dark threat, mostly during the evening and overnight hours, Friday into Saturday morning. So very robust environment. Certainly we've gained a little bit of confidence here in some discrete supercell development down here across eastern Arkansas, southeast Missouri, and southward into north Mississippi, southeast Arkansas, western Tennessee going into the evening hours today. So very potent setup once again. But now let's go into Saturday. Saturday has the potential to be the most robust day of this 3-day stretch, particularly Friday. Going to have very widespread severe weather today, and we will have that tomorrow, but the most intense severe weather could take place across the southeast tomorrow, where the SPC has that moderate risk. So we're going to move back out here. This is the NAM at 500 millibars. We'll start tonight at 7 p.m., so 0Z. And so you see the progression. Here is our shortwave trough for today's threat, going to eject off to the east, kind of occlude. And then we're going to be left with this just broad troughing back here to the west out here. So this is the morning tomorrow. By 12Z tomorrow, that trough from today's threat all the way up into the Great Lakes region, up in here. And then you see this just broad troughing back here to the west, out across the much of the southern, southwest kind of quadrant of the country, if you will. That is going to start to move into the region of the southeast going into the afternoon hours tomorrow. And this is a pretty fast-moving jet streak. And this is one of the things that they highlighted in the SPC outlook for day 2 last night, was the fast-moving nature of this jet streak. And there's been a lot of work recently from spearheaded by SPC meteorologist Chris Broyles, showing that these faster-moving jet streaks tend to be much more favorable for significant severe weather outbreaks than a slower-moving jet streak for a lot of reasons. Tends to be a little bit more discrete activity because your flow is a little bit more has a little bit more westerly component to it. You can have strong areas of lift right along the leading edge of the jet streak, which can accompany supercells and make them long-track tornadic supercells, and for several other reasons as well. Stronger low-level jet response, etc. And this is going to be a good example of that. So we start here back. So the way you do this is basically you go back to 6Z. So 6Z, the early morning of our event, and we look where our jet streak is. So our jet streak of interest looks to be this purple area back in here, out across far southern California. Then as we move into the afternoon hours and evening hours, you go to 0Z. And so you take the centroid of that. And so that has moved quite a ways there. That is certainly a quite a distance that's traveled there. So I just want to get a quick look at how far this has traveled. Just get a rough estimate there. So Southern California to Texas there, that's about 1,100 miles or so. So we'll say on a conservative side, about 1,050 miles in 18 hours. That's a 58 knot jet translation, 500 millibar jet translation speed. The threshold for significant tornado outbreaks in that the Broyles research is generally 40 knots. So that is going to be a very fast translating jet, which is going to be much more favorable for significant severe weather. Now, the interesting thing here is it's located a little bit farther back to the west than you might typically think would be favorable for really robust severe weather. Events like April 27, 2011, you had this jet streak really kind of moving through the warm sector during the day. But I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue here. The fast translation speed of this mid-level jet, and it's going to be starting to impinge upon this area of Louisiana into Mississippi by late afternoon or so, right at the maximum of peak heating. So right about late afternoon, 3 to 4 p.m. or so, could see storm development much earlier than that. But the intensity of these storms might really ramp up as we go into the afternoon and late afternoon hours tomorrow, going into early evening, as this jet streak really starts to translate through the area. And it may just overall just shift things back to the west a hair overall, back into more central, west central Louisiana, moving eastward into Mississippi and Alabama. But this is a pretty textbook look for a jet streak as far as initiating a significant severe weather outbreak, according to that Broyles research, and based on how fast it's moving through the southern U.S. So again, that's going to be moving through. It's going to be taking on kind of a neutral tilt with time there, and as we go into the late afternoon, it's going to be continuing to increase the forcing across this area to support robust severe weather right out ahead of it. That fire hose there with this jet streak aimed right at that Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama corridor, and it will only translate east with time. So very favorable mid-level pattern here for a tornado, a significant severe weather event, including perhaps a tornado outbreak. Let's go ahead and go down to the surface. So here we'll go back to this evening. So that surface low from today's event ejects quickly off to the northeast and starts to really occlude as we go into the morning hours tomorrow. And then the interesting thing here, we start to get a little bit more of a surface low to develop, a secondary surface low to develop there, right in the southeast Arkansas, northern Louisiana, northwest Mississippi vicinity. And that is going to be pretty critical here with this event. This is a pretty common occurrence in southeast severe weather outbreaks and tornado outbreaks. April 27, 2011 had something similar where we're not relying on the surface low only off to the north from that's up in the Great Lakes region. We actually have secondary surface low development out in here, out across the southern portion of the risk area. So that is going to lead to a very confined, not confined really, but a very well-defined warm sector down here to the south of this surface low, and that is going to really focus the warm advection regime and focus that warm sector. And so we're going to have a pretty pristine warm sector, it looks like. One of the concerns the previous few days has been the degree of early convection across the warm sector. The European model has been really the only model showing a lot of convection out here across the warm sector going into the morning hours on Saturday, which would have drastic impacts on the environment for the afternoon round of storms, likely nixing a lot of the severe weather threat if that European solution would come to fruition. We've since kind of backed off from that, and unfortunately for the folks in these areas, we've seen this limiting factor, this potential fly in the ointment, kind of diminish a little bit, and the confidence in a more pristine warm sector is going to be is a little bit higher now, and we have pretty good confidence that we're going to see a pretty pristine warm sector here. The reason for that is perhaps this early shortwave that comes through. So you see here as we go into the afternoon, or let me go to 500 millibars here. It might be a little bit more visible. So here we are, 500 millibars at 15Z. This is 10 a.m. Here you see our trough up in here from today's threat, but you see this little bit of ridging over here. This is going to keep things, and we're, again, kind of well ahead of the secondary jet streak that's going to be moving in. So we're kind of in this no man's land for much of the morning. Not a ton of forcing over the warm sector, maybe a little bit of subsidence actually, as underneath this little bit of ridging across the southeast that may keep things at bay a little bit. I'll zoom in here to our southeast sector, but you see here not a ton of forcing, a little bit of ridging actually moving through. This is 12Z tomorrow, so that may allow things to be a little bit quiet during the morning hours tomorrow across the warm sector, which may be a factor in leading us to a more pristine warm sector tomorrow to support a really robust, significant severe weather outbreak across the southeast states tomorrow. So that surface low kind of moves off to the northeast, and then that threat will only translate off to the east into Alabama, maybe western Georgia, going into the late night and overnight hours Saturday into Sunday morning. But here is our moisture. We'll start off with today's, this evening. Again, very broad warm sector here, already developing across this region tonight, and that will only continue into tomorrow. You see that warm sector pretty uninterrupted going into tomorrow morning. Not a lot of convection overall across these areas, and this is a pretty significant look here. 60s into even some 70s dew points out across Mississippi into Louisiana. You see the well-defined warm sector here ahead of this kind of a dry line / maybe Pacific front or cold front back in here, trailing off down to the south. And so we have a very broad warm sector stretching over multiple states. We talk about this a lot. The broader your warm sector is, the greater chances for a long duration severe threat. And that's certainly what we're seeing here. Broad warm sector, really robust low level moisture, and an unsullied warm sector. Now, we probably will have a lot of convection going on in the morning hours, perhaps Arkansas into Louisiana, perhaps with a little bit of an early shortwave that moves through. It's going to be very subtle. Perhaps a little bit of this remnant stronger flow aloft moves through, and then behind that we're kind of ridged here over the down here across these areas. Very flat flow, not much height change there to support any forcing for storms early. But we're going to have probably storms developing along this boundary, this cold front / dry line, whatever this boundary is. We'll probably see storms start to develop during the morning, mid to late morning to early afternoon hours there, but that's not going to have much of an effect on the warm sector. Warm sector should stay pretty pristine going into the afternoon hours, and we're going to have to watch for any confluence bands out here in the open warm sector. If we pull up our surface maps, I can already see a few confluence bands here. You see out here across, let me draw in our warm sector real quick for you. So this is 21Z, so 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. So there's our warm sector, and you see our confluence bands here. You see in southwest Mississippi, slightly more veered flow with more southeasterly flow there. So clear confluence band there. Could be a couple others in there as well. So we're going to have to watch for any confluence bands that develop out in the open warm sector, and there should be a few, and that is going to set the stage for multiple, for bands of tornadic, possibly significantly tornadic supercells out here across this region. Let's take a couple soundings. Low-level jet will be very strong out across this region. You see with that low-level cyclogenesis out here across southeast Arkansas during the day, that secondary low, we're going to see a ramp up in the low-level jet across Mississippi, and that is what is going to drive a very strong low-level response with intense low-level shear to support significant tornadoes. So let's go ahead and take a sounding here. We'll take one right at Jackson. Right at Jackson in the open warm sector. And this is going to be why we're so concerned about tomorrow's setup. I mean, I don't really know what to say. There's not a lot of words to describe how upper echelon this environment is. Now, the NAM is a little bit more robust with the lapse rates aloft, a little bit probably too high with the instability. But even if we get half of this, 1,600 joules per kilogram mixed layer K, that's more than adequate for severe storms. And with this kind of a kinematic profile, strong deep layer shear approaching 70 knots with very strong low-level shear, strong veering and strengthening of the winds with height as that low-level jet ramps up ahead of that secondary low-level cyclone. This is just an environment. This is a truly upper echelon environment. Strong low-level instability, very steep lapse rates aloft. Not something you see in the southeast often. Although all your lapse rates here in excess of 7 degrees Celsius per kilometer. This is about as impressive as it gets. And if we do get supercells to fire, which it's looking fairly likely that we get supercells to fire here in the open warm sector, they will have a chance to be strongly tornadic, potentially, as the SPC Outlook said, multiple strong to long track high-end tornadic supercells are likely across the warm sector tomorrow. So that is going to include this warm sector very broad, and that could be even as far back as west central Louisiana, eastward into much of Mississippi. That confluence band, wherever that sets up, could be important, will be important. Could be kind of south central Mississippi into southeast Louisiana, and that threat will only shift off to the east as we go into the evening hours. Saturday will shift into eastern Mississippi, much of Alabama overnight. We'll continue that threat for strong tornadoes overnight, and then we shift it into toward the Georgia vicinity going into Sunday morning. Good thing for Sunday morning, instability will be waning with time, so but still we'll have enough moisture and enough instability to support a severe threat going into Sunday. But overall, this is I don't mean to scare anybody, and I don't like to hype things up, but this is about as intense as it gets, about as robust of a look as it gets for a significant tornado outbreak. High confidence in open warm sector supercells in a very pristine, untapped warm sector. In this kind of an environment that only spells trouble. So I implore folks in these regions here, particularly Louisiana, Mississippi, into Alabama, please have your severe weather plans in place. Have multiple ways of receiving warnings. Have those weather radios handy, this could be a pretty significant outbreak. There's a lot of talk about will a high risk be issued. It's certainly on the table for Saturday, especially if we get continued confidence in a pristine warm sector going into the afternoon. This certainly could be a very upper echelon type event, even for Southeast standards. So please prepare. This is a very significant threat, especially for significant long track, strong to violent tornadoes and significant damaging winds. All right, and then we go briefly, just a brief look at Sunday. You see that moisture kind of moves into the eastern seaboard states. We do have pretty broad moisture there from the Virginia and the Carolinas southward. We'll take a sounding here in South Carolina. The trough will be mostly kind of losing some steam a little bit, just broad southwesterly flow here, not anything real focused. So I suspect we might see more of a QLCS threat here. Minimal instability, fairly low instability, but still strong low-level and deep layer shear to support severe weather going into Sunday. All right, let's take a look at some cams here. So this is going to be our 12Z HRRR. And so this is how things are going to possibly play out here. This is just one solution. I want you to keep in mind that the herd does overmix quite a bit. And so that means it's going to bring too much dry air down from above and really mix out those dew points. You see here, dew points in the low to mid 40s and upper 40s there. That's just way too low across these regions. Dew points in the 30s up here in Iowa. That's just a pretty pathetic solution. We're going to have 50s dew points up here in Iowa, Illinois, Missouri. So I would take this with a grain of salt, but at least just to kind of give us an idea of what the overall progression might be, we can look at this. So here you are off to the north. We get a pretty quick transition to a more of a banded linear type mode here. Very quick transition to a squall line north, but we get more semi-discrete supercell activity farther to the south across Missouri as we go into the afternoon hours today on this run. You see multiple kind of semi-discrete supercells in this broken band. And again, as we go into the evening hours, going to have that threat for significant tornadoes and strong damaging winds. Again, significant damaging wind gusts with this QLCS, maybe some embedded tornadic activity, but down here, this is where we're most concerned. Central to eastern Missouri, southern Illinois, as we go into the evening hours there with this semi-discrete supercell mode. Now you see down to the south, once again in this warm advection regime, multiple supercells start to develop here along the Mississippi River. By late afternoon to early evening, they become pretty robust here. A couple of real strong supercells there up into central Mississippi. Don't worry too much about the placement here. Anybody in this vicinity, this is just one model run, but here at least we're getting, again, increased confidence in supercell activity after dark across these areas with that right entrance region of the jet streak. More supercell activity down to the south, Missouri Boot Heel vicinity, western Tennessee and Kentucky. And then we go into tomorrow. Let me shift down to our southeast sector for you tomorrow. And this is going to show you here, I took a look at this before we logged on. And again, you take this with a grain of salt. These cams, again, as you know, are not all that good, more than a few hours out from an event. But this is tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, you see some activity there along to the north there, but watch what happens here during the afternoon. Multiple bands of likely strongly tornadic supercells out in here along the front/dry line back to the west, and then out in the open warm sector. These would certainly pose a risk for significant long track, strong to violent tornadoes. And then you see it continues into Alabama into the overnight hours. This is at 7 p.m., 8, 9 p.m., continued supercell activity across much of Alabama, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, down toward Montgomery, and then it continues into Georgia. Even through the morning, you see some supercell activity in there into Georgia, the Atlanta area, overnight Saturday into Sunday morning, and it just kind of continues off there into Sunday morning. So this is just a very potent look here on our models. Let's take a look at a couple other models real quick. Have the ARW model. So this is only out 24 hours, so we're not going to see the Saturday threat. So we'll focus here more so on the Midwest and Mid-South threat here today. But you see here, quick transition to a line off to the north, and then more semi-discrete supercell activity. St. Louis, Jefferson City, down here into southern Missouri, the Ozarks there. Semi-discrete supercell activity continues into the evening hours, and you see across Mississippi some stronger supercells there, some stronger supercells on the southern end of the line across Arkansas, southern Missouri. These certainly would pose that all hazards significant tornado risk, strong damaging winds, and some large hail. Just very potent look here for tonight as well on the ARW. So the HUR and the ARW very much on par here with their solutions, really honing in on this area of central southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, western Tennessee, Kentucky, southern Illinois, as well as Mississippi, and perhaps a separate area of supercellular convection tonight. NSSL WRF. Last cam, and then we'll wrap things up here. So NSSL WRF quickly transitions things to a line. Some stuff down here across Mississippi once again. So this Mississippi corridor, we've had 3 convection allowing models now showing this corridor down here across northern and central Mississippi tonight. So that needs to be, you need to be on alert there. Greenville, Greenwood, Mississippi, Oxford, Tupelo, even as far south as Jackson tonight. Definitely needs to be on alert. And then some more activity there, some discrete supercell activity into eastern Missouri and Illinois. St. Louis, certainly. Watch out there for some significant severe weather tonight. So all in all, the models are now really honing in on a solution, and this is definitely set to be a very potent few-day stretch for us. Here is the outlook, day 1, convective outlook here. Once again, for today, level 4 out of 5, moderate risk, stretching all the way from central Iowa down all the way into far northern Mississippi. Des Moines, Jefferson City, Hannibal, St. Louis, Jackson, Tennessee, Springfield, Illinois, Peoria, Illinois, Memphis, under the gun for that greatest severe weather threat for today. Mostly intense damaging winds up here with northern extent in this risk area as that QLCS takes shape, strong momentum transport down to the surface of those stronger winds. But down here to the south, out across this area where the SPC has that strongest, that highest tornado risk for today, that 15% hatched, that is where we're watching for some significant long-track tornadic supercells here. Southern into southeast Missouri, eastern Missouri as well, southern Illinois, western Tennessee and Kentucky, all the way down into northeast Arkansas and northern Mississippi. The greatest threat for some significant tornadoes, particularly in the late afternoon through the evening hours today. And then perhaps significant tornadoes as far south as the Jackson area, southern Mississippi tonight, where that 10% hatched area is. So strong tornadoes possible tonight and significant damaging winds as well. Then tomorrow, again, very, very potent look on the models for tomorrow across the southeast, Louisiana into Mississippi, much of Alabama. Multiple rounds of perhaps strongly tornadic supercells, posing a risk for strong to violent tornadoes and significant damaging winds, are looking pretty like a pretty good shot here tomorrow, especially along any confluence bands in the open warm sector. Again, multiple rounds of convection, likely along the frontal zone here, northern portions of the risk area, and then a pretty untapped, unsullied warm sector down here across the moderate risk during the afternoon for robust tornadic supercell development, shifting into parts of Mississippi and Alabama with time going into the evening and overnight hours tomorrow. So I can't stress enough how significant this setup looks to be. I don't want to say that to scare anybody. I just say that to make sure that you are prepared for significant severe weather. Have, again, your weather radios handy. A lot of this activity will take place overnight, so have those weather radios plugged in and charged and ready to go, so that you can hear the warnings. If you're in bed sleeping, you can hear those warnings loud and clear. Have multiple ways of receiving warnings. Don't just rely on one warning system for you. Have multiple ways of receiving warnings. And stay tuned to the National Weather Service, Storm Prediction Center, and your local television meteorologists for the most up-to-date, accurate information on these setups as they occur. And please take all warnings seriously, even non-tornado warnings, even severe thunderstorm warnings. Again, straight line winds could be 70, 80, 90, 100 miles per hour with some of these storms and convective complexes in this setup. So take any warning within this event seriously. And have a plan in place. You never want to be scrambling when a tornado warning is issued for your area and not have a plan in place. So everybody, please stay safe out there. Have multiple ways of receiving warnings, and we'll get through this just fine. But for now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.